Hello Year 3 and welcome to lesson number 2 of this week where we're learning about the Roman army and their battle tactics in particular. So yesterday you should have looked at how we can make their weapons or their armour stronger. Today actually we're going to check whether we've got our tactics right and whether we need to just look at changing our battle formation maybe to make sure that we win any further battles. So we need to find out first of all how the Roman army was organised. Now the main part of the army was called the legion, and therefore Roman soldiers were known as legionaries, and the main commander of up to about 5,000 men was called the legatus, and the legatus was a bit like a general in modern terms. Then, who else was in the Roman army? Well, the Roman army was also made up of other soldiers. So one was called a centurion. A centurion was another commander who basically was in charge of between 80 and 100 men, and that's where the name centurion come from. They were experienced and skilled soldiers, and they were also responsible for training the army and training their troops that they were in charge of. Legionaries made up the main part of the army, and they were Roman citizens who were younger than 45 years old. They were well armed and well trained fighting men, and they were also skilled engineers and craftsmen because they also had to build roads, bridges, and forts when they were out conquering other countries. Another important role in the Roman army were the Standardbearers. Now each century, that's the group of 80 to 100 men, had its own emblem or standard. And as you can see in the picture here, the emblem of this standard bearer was a lion. You can see it on the flag, the standard, sorry, that he is holding. Now the standard bearer was a very experienced and trusted soldier, and the reason that they chose a very good soldier was if you lost your standard in battle, it was a really great disgrace and not good at all. Now, who else was in the army though? Because the Romans, it wasn't just legionaries, it wasn't just centurions, and it wasn't just standard bearers. They also had auxiliaries, and these might have been doctors, engineers, scribes to write down, map makers, and even soldiers from lands conquered by the Romans who volunteered to fight for the Romans. They might not necessarily have been from Italy themselves. And many of these auxiliaries had special skills, like cavalry soldiers, which are soldiers on horseback, stone shot slingers with sort of slingshots or catapults, or even archers with a bow and an arrow. Now here are the archers, a bit more detail about them. They were otherwise known as the Sagittarii. Now that's the proper Roman name. They used a bow and arrow to shoot the enemy. Some archers were foot archers who marched and fought on feet, and they walked and marched, as I said. And some were horse archers who fought on the back of a horse. Now, the most important thing for us today, children, is we are going to look at the Roman tactics. Now that we know a bit more about the different parts of the army, we're going to find out a little bit more how we can use our soldiers in the best way to win a battle. So the Romans used to arrive, set up camp, and then send a letter to the local ruler to ask them to surrender to the Romans. And the reason for this is because Romans didn't fight unless they absolutely had to. So this time gave the Romans this gave the Romans time to rest and decide how and when they would attack. So they researched the strengths and the weaknesses of their opponents and chose different strategies to suit the occasion. They then put their soldiers into different battle formations. Now, formations is a special word though. That's basically just how the groups of different soldiers were arranged on the battlefield. So they decided on the best battle formations for when they went into battle. Now we're going to look at some different some special formations, Roman formations now. The first one is probably the most famous, and it's called the tortoise. And the Roman term for this is Testudo. Now, it was used to advance troops. You can see in the pictures there, they're holding up their shields to the front, and they're also the men in the middle are holding their shields up in the air over the top to create a barrier for any arrows or slingshots or rocks or anything that the enemy might have shown at them, and it was actually a really, really strong formation. And they moved quite slowly to ensure that the shields were touching and that no missiles, as I said, could get in or injure any of the soldiers. Now, some people nowadays have recreated the tortoise, and I'm going to show you a quick video now of how it might have looked when they went into battle. So here is a quick video of the Testudo formation, how it might have looked marching into battle. The shield is really tight on the top and on the side.
Was ihr seht, da ist also kein Spalt mehr, wo man noch
getting in. So now that you've seen the Testudo, the tortoise formation, another formation that the Roman army might have used was something called the Wedge, and this was used to divide the enemy and cause confusion in their ranks. So the legionaries formed into a triangle shape. The Centurion was at the tip of the legionaries on either side of the triangle, and they had to again stay close together to stop the enemy breaking line. As the wedge advances, so as it went forward, more soldiers joined at the ends to divide the enemy even further. So it gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger. And breaking the enemy's formation was key to winning on the Roman battlefields, because the Romans stayed nice and organised, and this confused and maybe broke up the enemies who weren't quite as organised, which meant they could be successful. Now, some other weapons they might have used, rather than just soldiers, legionaries and auxiliaries, they might have had some other weapons. One of them was called the Ballista, and this is part of the Roman artillery. Artillery basically just means things that could be shot from far off. So the Ballista was basically a giant crossbow. It had iron-tipped bolts, and which it would fire towards the enemy, and the bolts whistled through the air about 50 meters per second, which is incredibly fast, and they could go through armor. Another piece of Roman artillery was the Onager. Now, the Onager was a giant slingshot. It looks a little bit like the Ballista. The giant catapult, I should say. It could fire rocks of about 70 kilograms, which is incredibly heavy. Each rock was loaded in a sling at the end of the arm, and it could also fire balls of burning tar towards the enemy. Sounds quite dangerous to me. Now, Roman soldiers usually lined up for battle in tight formation, and they would fire a terrifying burst of arrows first of all. Then the Roman army would march at a slow and steady pace towards the enemy. They wouldn't run, they would march slowly, and that was to make sure that their formations, which were really effective, kept tight and kept organised. And then at the last minute, they may have hurled some javelins and drew their swords before charging into the enemy. So the auxiliaries may have thrown javelins or slingshots, and then they would have charged. Then they would have used the cavalry, which is the soldiers riding on horses, to chase anyone who tried to run away. Here is just an example of a Roman battle formation. So you can see the enemy at the start. The legionaries might have been in the middle, and then the auxiliaries either side. And then the cavalry might protect on either side of the legionaries in the middle. And at the back, right at the back, were the commanders. And the commanders' job were to look and to see how the battle was going. And then if it wasn't quite going their way, they might have to change tactics a little bit. So children, your task for today is to create your own Roman army in whichever way you choose. You could choose to draw it on a piece of paper. You could choose to use toys or teddies or things like that to represent the different parts of the Roman army, or you could use different objects around your home. It doesn't matter which you choose, you can choose anything that you like. Then you'll need to put your army into a formation that you think would win a battle. Now you need to think really carefully about where you position your troops. For example, you might not want to put your archers right at the front because they could be easily taken out by enemy troops. Then finally, once you've put your army into the correct formation, I would like you to label the army with the correct vocabulary that you have learned today. If you need to stop and go back on the video to find out the correct words, then that's absolutely fine as well. Now I'm going to show you the way that I chose to complete my task.
So children, hopefully you can see this is how I've made my Roman army, and I have used food to make my Roman army. You can see the formations from above. In a moment I'll go through the different parts that I've done. So this is my army ready to take on and hopefully defeat the enemy, which are the evil mushrooms. So I'm going to start from the back. And here is the legatus, which I've used a cupcake for because he's most important. Quite often the commanders and the legatus were up on raised ground, so I've put it up on an egg box so they can see the battle and see what's going on and see if they need to make any changes. Then the next part, I have used 2 satsumas for my onagers, which will be firing rocks or balls of burning tar all the way over my army and into the evil mushrooms. The next part, I've got my cavalry, which were my mounted soldiers on horseback. And I've put them at the sides to hopefully protect the rest of the army and the archers and things in the middle from any attacks from the side, and also to catch anyone who is really, really fast too. In front of the onagers, I've got my archers, which were called the Centurion, and they again, they're going to do the same job as the onagers, but they're going to shoot arrows this time over my army to get to the evil mushrooms. Next to the cavalry, I had my Ballista, which are our crossbows. Again, I've put them at the side because I want them to do a little bit of protecting around my main army that are in the middle. So hopefully they can shoot their bolts, their crossbows all around the outsides to protect the rest of the army. Moving on, I've got my main part of my infantry down, my main numbers, my main soldiers who are going to be fighting the evil mushrooms. So here are my auxiliaries, and they will be the javelin throwers and the slingshots. So they can't fire quite as far as the ballistas or the onagers or the archers, but they'll be able to do a little bit of damage. So that's why they are at the front. Next to them, I have my Testudo, the tortoise formation. So I've got 2 of those, one here and the other one either side, who are going to march slowly forward and protect themselves from the front, from the side and the top as well, in case the enemy mushrooms have any archers or any things themselves which they can fire from long distance. Then finally, last but not least, right at the front, I have got my wedge, which I've used pasta to show the wedge shape. Right at the front would have been the Centurion, and they're going to charge forward and hopefully divide and conquer the evil enemy mushrooms. So, I wonder how this battle is going to go. Here we are again, children, at the scene of the battle 2 hours later. As you can see, the Roman legatus stands victorious on top of his hill. In front of him, the onagers and the archers and the Centurion are unmoved. And then all around, sadly, you can see the remains of the evil mushroom army, who have been well and truly chopped, sliced, and defeated.